Story 1. The Monkey's Paw. Without, the night was cold and wet, but in the small parlor of Laburnum Villa the blinds were drawn, and the fire burned brightly. Father and son were at chess, the former, who possessed ideas about the game involving radical changes, putting his king into such sharp and unnecessary perils that it even provoked comment from the white-haired old lady knitting placidly by the fire. "Hark at the wind," said Mr. White, who, having seen a fatal mistake after it was too late, was amiably desirous of preventing his son from seeing it. "I'm listening," said the latter, grimly surveying the board as he stretched out his hand. "Check. I should hardly think that he'd come tonight," said his father, with his hand poised over the board. "Mate," replied the son. "That's the worst of living so far out," bawled Mr. White with sudden and unlooked-for violence. "Of all the beastly, slushy, out-of-the-way places to live in, this is the worst. Pathway's a bog, and the road's a torrent. I don't know what people are thinking about. I suppose because only 2 houses in the road are let, they think it doesn't matter." "Never mind, dear," said his wife soothingly. "Perhaps you'll win the next one." Mr. White looked up sharply, just in time to intercept a knowing glance between mother and son. The words died away on his lips, and he hid a guilty grin in his thin gray beard. "There he is," said Herbert White, as the gate banged too loudly and heavy footsteps came toward the door. The old man rose with hospitable haste, and, opening the door, was heard condoling with the new arrival. The new arrival also condoled with himself, so that Mrs. White said, "Tut, tut," and coughed gently as her husband entered the room, followed by a tall, burly man, beady of eye and rubicund of visage. "Sergeant Major Morris," he said, introducing him. The sergeant major shook hands, and, taking the proffered seat by the fire, watched contentedly while his host got out whiskey and tumblers and stood a small copper kettle on the fire. At the third glass his eyes got brighter, and he began to talk, the little family circle regarding with eager interest this visitor from distant parts, as he squared his broad shoulders in the chair and spoke of wild scenes and doughty deeds of wars and plagues and strange peoples. 21 years of it," said Mr. White, nodding at his wife and son. "When he went away he was a slip of a youth in the warehouse. Now look at him. He don't look to have taken much harm," said Mrs. White politely. "I'd like to go to India myself," said the old man, "just to look round a bit, you know." "Better where you are," said the sergeant major, shaking his head. He put down the empty glass and, sighing softly, shook it again. "I should like to see those old temples and fakirs and jugglers," said the old man. "What was that you started telling me the other day about a monkey's paw or something, Morris?" "Nothing," said the soldier hastily. "Leastways nothing worth hearing." "Monkey's paw," said Mrs. White curiously. "Well, it's just a bit of what you might call magic, perhaps," said the sergeant major offhandedly. His 3 listeners leaned forward eagerly. The visitor absent-mindedly put his empty glass to his lips and then set it down again. His host filled it for him. "To look at," said the sergeant major, fumbling in his pocket, "it's just an ordinary little paw, dried to a mummy." He took something out of his pocket and proffered it. Mrs. White drew back with a grimace, but her son, taking it, examined it curiously. "And what is there special about it?" inquired Mr. White as he took it from his son, and, having examined it, placed it upon the table. "It had a spell put on it by an old fakir," said the sergeant major. a very holy man. He wanted to show that fate ruled people's lives, and that those who interfered with it did so to their sorrow. He put a spell on it, so that 3 separate men could each have 3 wishes from it. His manner was so impressive that his hearers were conscious that their light laughter jarred somewhat. "Well, why don't you have 3, sir?" said Herbert White cleverly. The soldier regarded him in the way that middle age is wont to regard presumptuous youth. "I have," he said quietly, and his blotchy face whitened. "And did you really have the 3 wishes granted?" asked Mrs. White. "I did," said the sergeant major, and his glass tapped against his strong teeth. "And has anybody else wished?" persisted the old lady. "The first man had his 3 wishes, yes," was the reply. "I don't know what the first 2 were, but the 3rd was for death. That's how I got the paw." His tones were so grave that a hush fell upon the group. "If you've had your 3 wishes, it's no good to you now." "Then, Morris," said the old man at last, "what do you keep it for?" The soldier shook his head. "Fancy, I suppose," he said slowly. "I did have some idea of selling it, but I don't think I will. It has caused enough mischief already. Besides, people won't buy. They think it's a fairy tale, some of them, and those who do think anything of it want to try it first and pay me afterward." "If you could have another 3 wishes," said the old man, eyeing him keenly, "would you have them?" "I don't know," said the other. "I don't know." He took the paw and, dangling it between his forefinger and thumb, suddenly threw it upon the fire. White, with a slight cry, stooped down and snatched it off. "Better let it burn," said the soldier solemnly. "If you don't want it, Morris," said the other, "give it to me." "I won't," said his friend doggedly. "I threw it on the fire. If you keep it, don't blame me for what happens. Pitch it on the fire again like a sensible man." The other shook his head and examined his new possession closely. "How do you do it?" he inquired. "Hold it up in your right hand and wish aloud," said the sergeant major. "But I warn you of the consequences." "Sounds like the Arabian Nights," said Mrs. White as she rose and began to set the supper. "Don't you think you might wish for pairs of hands for me?" Her husband drew the talisman from pocket, and then all 3 burst into laughter as the sergeant major, with a look of alarm on his face, caught him by the arm. "If you must wish," he said gruffly, "wish for something sensible, Mr." White dropped it back in his pocket and, placing chairs, motioned his friend to the table. In the business of supper the talisman was partly forgotten, and afterward the 3 sat listening in an enthralled fashion to a second installment of the soldier's adventures in India. "If the tale about the monkey's paw is not more truthful than those he has been telling us," said Herbert, as the door closed behind their guest, just in time for him to catch the last train, "we shall not make much out of it." "Did you give him anything for it, father?" inquired Mrs. White, regarding her husband closely. "A trifle," said he, coloring slightly. "He didn't want it, but I made him take it, and he pressed me again to throw it away." "Likely," said Herbert, with pretended horror. "Why, we're going to be rich and famous and happy. Wish to be an emperor, father, to begin with, and you can't be henpecked." He darted round the table, pursued by the maligned Mrs. White, armed with an antimacassar. Mr. White took the paw from his pocket and eyed it dubiously. "I don't know what to wish for, and that's a fact," he said slowly. "It seems to me I've got all I want. If you only cleared the house, you'd be quite happy, wouldn't you?" said Herbert, with his hand on his shoulder. "Well, wish for 200 pounds. Then that line's just do it." His father, smiling shamefacedly at his own credulity, held up the talisman as his son, with a solemn face, somewhat marred by a wink at his mother, sat down at the piano and struck a few impressive chords. "I wish for 200 pounds," said the old man distinctly. A fine crash from the piano greeted the words, interrupted by a shuddering cry from the old man. His wife and son ran toward him. "It moved," he cried, with a glance of disgust at the object as it lay on the floor. "As I wished. It twisted in my hand like a snake." "Well, I don't see the money," said his son as he picked it up and placed it on the table, "and I bet I never shall." "It must have been your fancy, father," said his wife, regarding him anxiously. He shook his head. "Never mind, though. There's no harm done. But it gave me a shock all the same." They sat down by the fire again while the two men finished their pipes. Outside, the wind was higher than ever, and the old man started nervously at the sound of a door banging upstairs. A silence unusual and depressing settled upon all three, which lasted until the old couple rose to retire for the night. "I expect you'll find the cash tied up in a big bag in the middle of your bed," said Herbert, as he bade them good night, "and something horrible squatting up on top of the wardrobe watching you as you pocket your ill-gotten gains." He sat alone in the darkness, gazing at the dying fire and seeing faces in it. The last face was so horrible and so simian that he gazed at it in amazement. It got so vivid that, with a little uneasy laugh, he felt on the table for a glass containing little water to throw over it. His hand grasped the monkey's paw, and with a little shiver he wiped his hand on his coat and went up to bed. In the brightness of the wintry sun next morning, as it streamed over the breakfast table, he laughed at his fears. There was an air of prosaic wholesomeness about the room which it had lacked on the previous night, and the dirty, shriveled little paw was pitched on the sideboard with a carelessness which betokened no great belief in its virtues. "I suppose all old soldiers are the same," said Mrs. White. "The idea of our listening to such nonsense! How could wishes be granted in these days? And if they could, how could 200 pounds hurt you, father? Might drop on his head from the sky," said the frivolous Herbert. "Morris said the things happen so naturally," said his father, "that you might, if you so wished, attribute it to coincidence." "Well, don't break into the money before I come back," said Herbert as he rose from the table. "I'm afraid it'll turn you into a mean, avaricious man, and we shall have to disown you." His mother laughed, and following him to the door, watched him down the road, and returning to the breakfast table, was very happy at the expense of her husband's credulity, all of which did not prevent her from scurrying to the door at the postman's knock, nor prevent her from referring somewhat shortly to retired sergeant majors of bibulous habits when she found that the post brought a tailor's bill. "Herbert will have some more of his funny remarks, I expect, when he comes home," she said as they sat at dinner. "I dare say," said Mr. White, pouring himself out some beer. "But for all that the thing moved in my hand, that I'll swear to." "You thought it did," said the old lady soothingly. "I say it did," replied the other. "There was no thought about it. I had just—" "What's the matter?" His wife made no reply. She was watching the mysterious movements of a man outside, who, peering in an undecided fashion at the house, appeared to be trying to make up his mind to enter in mental connection with the 200 pounds, she noticed that the stranger was well dressed and wore a silk hat of glossy newness. 3 times he paused at the gate and then walked on again. The 4th time he stood with his hand upon it, and then with sudden resolution flung it open and walked up the path. Mrs. White at the same moment placed her hands behind her and hurriedly unfastening the strings of her apron, put that useful article of apparel beneath the cushion of her chair. She brought the stranger, who seemed ill at ease, into the room. He gazed at her furtively and listened in a preoccupied fashion as the old lady apologized for the appearance of the room and her husband's coat, a garment which he usually reserved for the garden. She then waited as patiently as her sex would permit for him to broach his business, but he was at first strangely silent. "I was asked to call," he said at last, and stooped and picked a piece of cotton from his trousers. "I come from Ma and Megan's." The old lady started. "Is anything the matter?" she asked, breathlessly. "Has anything happened to Herbert? What is it? What is it?" Her husband interposed. There, mother," he said, hastily. "Sit down and don't jump to conclusions. You've not brought bad news, I'm sure, sir," and he eyed the other wistfully. "I'm sorry," began the visitor. "Is he hurt?" demanded the mother, wildly. The visitor bowed in assent. "Badly hurt," he said, quietly, "but he is not in any pain." "Oh, thank God," said the old woman, clasping her hands. "Thank God for that. Thank—" She broke off suddenly as the sinister meaning of the assurance dawned upon her, and she saw the awful confirmation of her fears in the other's perverted face. She caught her breath and, turning to her slower-witted husband, laid her trembling old hand upon his. There was a long silence. "He was caught in the machinery," said the visitor, at length in a low voice. "Caught in the machinery," repeated Mr. White, in a dazed fashion. "Yes." He sat staring blankly out at the window, and, taking his wife's hand between his own, pressed it as he had been wont to do in their old courting days nearly 40 years before. "He was the only one left to us," he said, turning gently to the visitor. "It is hard," the other coughed, and rising, walked slowly to the window. "The firm wished me to convey their sincere sympathy with you in your great loss," he said, without looking round. "I beg that you will understand I am only their servant and merely obeying orders." There was no reply. The old woman's face was white, her eyes staring, and her breath inaudible. On the husband's face was a look such as his friend the sergeant might have carried into his first action. "I was to say that Ma and Megan's disclaim all responsibility," continued the other. "They admit no liability at all, but in consideration of your son's services, they wish to present you with a certain sum as compensation." Mr. White dropped his wife's hand, and, rising to his feet, gazed with a look of horror at his visitor. His dry lips shaped the words, "How much?" £200 was the answer. Unconscious of his wife's shriek, the old man smiled faintly, put out his hands like a sightless man, and dropped, a senseless heap, to the floor. In the huge new cemetery, some 2 miles distant, the old people buried their dead and came back to a house steeped in shadow and silence. It was all over so quickly that at first they could hardly realize it, and remained in a state of expectation, as though of something else to happen. Something else which was to lighten this load, too heavy for old hearts to bear. But the days passed, and expectation gave place to resignation. the hopeless resignation of the old, sometimes miscalled apathy. Sometimes they hardly exchanged a word, for now they had nothing to talk about, and their days were long to weariness. It was about a week after that the old man, waking suddenly in the night, stretched out his hand and found himself alone. The room was in darkness, and the sound of subdued weeping came from the window. He raised himself in bed and listened. "Come back," he said tenderly, "you will be cold." "It is colder for my son," said the old woman, and wept afresh. The sound of her sobs died away on his ears. The bed was warm, and his eyes heavy with sleep. He dozed fitfully, and then slept until a sudden wild cry from his wife awoke him with a start. "The paw!" she cried wildly, "the monkey's paw!" He started up in alarm. Where is it? What's the matter?" She came stumbling across the room toward him. "I want it," she said quietly. "You've not destroyed it?" "It's in the parlor, on the bracket," he replied, marveling. "Why?" she cried, and laughed together, and, bending over, kissed his cheek. "I only just thought of it," she said hysterically. "Why didn't I think of it before?" "Why didn't you think of it?" "Think of what?" he questioned. "The other 2 wishes," she replied rapidly. "We've only had one." "Was not that enough?" he demanded fiercely. "No," she cried triumphantly, "we'll have one more. Go down and get it quickly, and wish our boy alive again." The man sat up in bed and flung the bedclothes from his quaking limbs. "Good God, you are mad!" he cried, aghast. "Get it," she panted. "Get it quickly, and wish. Oh, my boy, my boy." Her husband struck a match and lit the candle. "Get back to bed," he said, and steadily. "You don't know what you are saying." "We had the first wish granted," said the old woman feverishly. "Why not the second?" "A coincidence," stammered the old man. "Go and get it and wish," cried his wife, quivering with excitement. The old man turned and regarded her, and his voice shook. "He has been dead 10 days, and besides, I would not tell you else, but I could only recognize him by his clothing. If he was too terrible for you to see, then how now?" "Bring him back," cried the old woman, and dragged him toward the door. "Do you think I fear the child I have nursed?" He went down in the darkness and felt his way to the parlor, and then to the mantelpiece. The talisman was in its place, and a horrible fear that the unspoken wish might bring his mutilated son before him ere he could escape from the room seized upon him, and he caught his breath as he found that he had lost the direction of the door. His brow cold with sweat, he felt his way round the table, and groped along the wall until he found himself in the small passage with the unwholesome thing in his hand. Even his wife's face seemed changed as he entered the room. It was white and expectant, and his fears seemed to have an unnatural look upon it. He was afraid of her. "Wished," she cried in a strong voice. "It is foolish and wicked," he faltered. "Wish," repeated his wife. He raised his hand. "I wish my son alive again." The talisman fell to the floor, and he regarded it fearfully. Then he sank trembling into a chair as the old woman, with burning eyes, walked to the window and raised the blind. He sat until he was chilled with the cold, glancing occasionally at the figure of the old woman peering through the window. The candle end, which had burned below the rim of the china candlestick, was throwing pulsating shadows on the ceiling and walls until, with a flicker larger than the rest, it expired. The old man, with an unspeakable sense of relief at the failure of the talisman, crept back to his bed, and a minute or two afterward the old woman came silently and apathetically beside him. Neither spoke, but lay silently listening to the ticking of the clock. A stair creaked, and a squeaky mouse scurried noisily through the wall. The darkness was oppressive, and after lying for some time screwing up his courage, he took the box of matches and, striking one, went downstairs for a candle. At the foot of the stairs the match went out, and he paused to strike another, and at the same moment a knock, so quiet and stealthy as to be scarcely audible, sounded on the front door. The matches fell from his hand and spilled in the passage. He stood motionless, his breath suspended until the knock was repeated. Then he turned and fled swiftly back to his room and closed the door behind him. A third knock sounded through the house. "What's that?" cried the old woman, starting up. "A rat," said the old man in shaking tones. "A rat. It passed me on the stairs." His wife sat up in bed, listening. A loud knock resounded through the house. "It's Herbert," she screamed. "It's Herbert." She ran to the door, but her husband was before her, and, catching her by the arm, held her tightly. "What are you going to do?" he whispered hoarsely. "It's my beau. It's Herbert," she cried, struggling mechanically. "I forgot it was 2 miles away. What are you holding me for? Let go. I must open the door. For God's sake, don't let it in," cried the old man, trembling. "You're afraid of your own son," she cried, struggling. "Let me go. I'm coming. Herbert, I'm coming." There was another knock, and another. The old woman with a sudden wrench broke free and ran from the room. Her husband followed to the landing and called after her appealingly as she hurried downstairs. He heard the chain rattle back and the bottom bolt drawn slowly and stiffly from the socket. Then the old woman's voice, strained and panting. "The bolt," she cried loudly. "Come down. I can't reach it." But her husband was on his hands and knees, groping wildly on the floor in search of the paw. If he could only find it before the thing outside got in. A perfect fusillade of knocks reverberated through the house, and he heard the scraping of a chair as his wife put it down in the passage against the door. He heard the creaking of the bolt as it came slowly back, and at the same moment he found the monkey's paw, and frantically breathed his third and last wish. The knocking ceased suddenly, although the echoes of it were still in the house. He heard the chair drawn back, and the door opened. A cold wind rushed up the staircase, and a long loud wail of disappointment and misery from his wife gave him courage to run down to her side, and then to the gate beyond. The street lamp flickering opposite shone on a quiet and deserted road. Story 2. Alone, Alone by Craig Peterson. The dream was the same as the night before, and the night before that, and the night before that. Matthew Scott hadn't slept well in a long time. Hell, he wasn't sure he had slept at all lately. When would it stop? When did it start? He woke up from his sleepless slumber just like every night, a frazzled mess. Sweat coated his skin from head to toe. The confusion was so great, it was a sensation he had never known. At first, his surroundings were non-existent, but would slowly crawl back to him. The faint glow of his digital alarm clock on the nightstand was just bright enough to make the area around his bed visible, barely. Beyond that, nothing. Without his glasses, he would have to squint to make out the digits on the clock, but there was no need for them. He knew what time it was without even looking at the time box. He knew the time because since the night visions started, he woke up, or was brought back from whatever world he was stuck in at exactly 3:39 a.m. He sat up and reached for the pad of paper and pen he kept next to the alarm clock. This was new for him. After having the dream for what must have been a couple of weeks, he became annoyed that he couldn't remember much of anything about it. After talking with his twin sister Michelle about this, she suggested placing the tablet close by and encouraged him to write down whatever came to mind as soon as possible. He and Michelle were very close, and he referred to her not only as his sister, but his best friend. Matt thought that to be great advice. Michelle was studying to be a psychiatrist and had done some research on dreams. She told him that once a person was awake, the memory of any dream faded just as quick as it was conceived. It couldn't hurt. With his mind racing, he frantically searched for a memory of his nightmare. He closed his eyes, hoping that would help bring something to him. He was gripping the pen so tightly that he could feel it bend to the point of breaking. Suddenly, images raced through his mind. Pictures like a slideshow. They were there, but nothing made sense. He started to shake. Sweat was running down his forehead. Without really knowing it, he started to scratch something on the pad. A sudden shudder ripped through his body, up his spine and into his head. A ringing started in his ears, but stopped almost the instant it started. Silence. 3:39. He reached for his glasses and slipped them on. He wanted to see what he had written down. At least he thinks he had written it. There was one word printed on the paper, one word that covered the entire 8.5 by 11 page. Not only written, engraved into the tablet. Alone, asterisk, 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 asterisk. In the morning, over a cup of strong black coffee, Matthew sat at the kitchen table talking to Michelle on the phone. After describing what had occurred, Matthew waited anxiously for his sister's evaluation. With only a one-word conclusion to the dream, Michelle was unable to shed any light on the subject. She encouraged him to keep the notepad nearby and try it again. As evening quickly approached and gave way to night, Matthew found himself lying on the couch in his den watching a ball game. With pad and pen on the floor, he felt himself start to doze off. His eyelids would slowly glide down and wash out the glow from the TV and bring him into darkness, only to shoot wide open as if he were trying to fight sleep, which would be the furthest thing from the truth. Finally, his eyes closed, and there was no shudder or glimmer of the TV. He woke with such violence that he could have sworn his bed jumped up and shifted over a few inches. Perspiration lathered his face and arms. The blurred light that caught the corner of his eye was too weak to be that of his television. He swiveled his head around and saw the 3 digits on his alarm clock. 3:39. Just in front of the alarm clock was the pen and paper. He grasped for them and started to write with the same intensity as the night before. Something was being put to paper in a manner that Matthew wasn't really sure was of his own power. While writing, visions filled his head, a lot of darkness interrupted by strikes of light. Something appeared at the end of this light. With each flash, the object was getting closer. The light was getting brighter and faster. With each flash, he felt his breath getting heavier and heavier. The unknown item was getting closer, breathing so loud it was deafening. Then, an empty void. One more grand burst of light, he saw it. A door. He felt quivers run through his body. The pen had fallen from his hand, but the pad of paper was going nowhere. How had he gotten to his bed? He didn't remember waking up and walking from the den. Perhaps he never fell asleep in the den, an extension of his dream. None of that really mattered right now. He reached over to the end table and twisted the knob on the small lamp. His hands were so sweaty that he had a hard time twisting the switch to the on position. He glanced down at the tablet and was bewildered at what he saw. First off, this was the second page in the bonded tab. Since he had written the word alone with such force the night before, the imprint was clearly visible. Accompanying the word was a picture. It was a door, a wooden door with one distinctive marking. Located on the top half of the door was the letter N. This was a door from his childhood. It was his sister's childhood bedroom door. Once again, Matthew found himself at the kitchen table, 2 cups of coffee down, countless to go. This time, it was his phone that rang. He looked down at his cell and saw his sister's face glowing on the screen. She really must be anxious to hear the latest episode of his nightly freak show. He spilled out the details to her and finished by telling her of his drawing, excluding the specifics of the door. She listened intently and asked a few questions, mostly about the light and the breathing, to which he had no answer. She was trying to help, and he could only offer up what he remembered. She paused for a second or two after he was done describing the events. "Did the door look familiar?" she asked. "I'm not sure," he lied. "Tell you what, let me text you a picture so you can see it." Okay. Within a minute her phone buzzed with the receipt of the incoming picture. She looked at it. After a few seconds, she realized she was holding her breath in. As she exhaled, the back of her neck tingled. "Matthew, that's my door." "I know," he admitted. They talked for a few minutes and ended the conversation with the agreement that they would talk again the next morning. Tonight, Matthew wanted nothing to do with falling asleep in the den. He had come to the realization that no matter where he fell asleep, he would wake in his bed. At 3:39, sleep came easy this night. Well, the act of falling asleep did. It was what happened on the other side of sleep that was difficult. His scream was so loud, it was surely heard by his neighbors. It wasn't a drop a hammer on your toe scream. It was a "I'm going to die in a matter of seconds" scream. Terror raced through his veins with such intensity, his vessels were sure to explode within him. He felt the color leave his skin, leaving him ghostly white. If only for a few seconds, his hands were clenched, grasping onto the sides of the bed, as if his mere existence depended on him not letting go. He jolted up, breathing so hard that he was panting. He felt tears rolling from his eyes. He snatched up the pen and paper and dropped it on his lap. In the same manner as the previous 2 nights, he started to input something onto the pad of paper, only it wasn't really him. He wasn't aware of what he was writing or how he was doing it. The only thing he was sure of was that the nightmare had ended, and this was a separate event. When the writing was complete, he tossed the pad down and threw himself back onto his pillow to catch his breath. He was spent. After a few minutes of listening to his own breaths and thoughts run through his mind, he swung his feet over the side of the bed and onto the floor. He picked up the worked-over tablet and gazed at the current page. What was written made no sense to him. It's time. 3 cups of coffee, and for Advil later, Matthew was on the phone with the only person he had been in contact with since he couldn't remember when. Lack of sleep was starting to take its toll. Michelle had a theory this time, though. She said it's possible that its time could mean that the dreams might be coming to an end. Her reasoning was that no matter how obscure these dreams were to Matthew, they were crystal clear in his brain, and the latest message might be a way for his inner self to let his outer self know that it was almost over. He could only hope that to be the truth. He was certain of one thing, though. He was scared. This time it was different. As reality vanished before him in his dark bedroom, a new world waited for him, one in which he knew no boundaries. The playing field was familiar but alien. He was standing outside staring at a house which had a striking resemblance to his childhood home. That was the only familiar part. Surrounding the home was nothing. No cars in the driveway, no trees, bushes, street lights, or even a neighboring house. It was as if the structure had been dropped on some deserted island, minus the island, nothing wherever he was. It was pitch black, only illuminated by occasional lightning strikes. Rain was falling with such anger that the drops were stinging his face, and they landed. He started to approach the house, either that or the house was descending on him. The closer the two got to each other, the more frequent the sky filled with fire bolts. Thunder clashed as loud as any noise he had ever experienced. Fear was creeping deeper and deeper into Matthew's body until it consumed his entire being. He was on the elevated porch, arm's length from the front door. This was definitely his boyhood home. Memories of his childhood danced through his head. Michelle and him playing like brothers and sisters do, laughing, smiling. Now this. What sort of evil existed here now? Without any discern, he had reached for and acquired the doorknob. The knob twisted easily in his grip, and the door flung open as if guided by a strong wind. Behind him, the sky was still exploding with fury. Just as the door met the wall behind it, lightning punched a hole into the darkness, exposing the inside of the home. On the far side of the front room stood something. Night overtook the home again. Matthew stood frozen with fear, not sure what to do. Another bolt lit the area. It was still there, but it wasn't something. It was someone. His glimpse was brief, but long enough to tell it was a person, or more of a someone than a something. Again, the light was gone and darkness was back. Rain was still pelting him from behind as he stood on the porch looking into the house. As the next round of night light shone down, there it was, standing face to face with him. Whoever it was stood the same height as him. Its breath filled Matthew's gaping mouth, rancid and putrid. If death had a taste, this was it. Hair slumped down across its face, or what must be the face. Looking at it, he couldn't really tell if it was facing him or looking into the house as he was. He only knew that it was looking at him because it exhausted its death gas at him. Over the booming thunder it spoke. One word, alone. In a flash it stood there. The next flash it was gone. The empty house stood before him. He looked behind him and saw exactly what he expected to see. Nothing. A different kind of emptiness. One in which he was sure that if he were to turn around and step off the porch, he would start falling and never reach a landing spot. The world behind him felt as empty as his soul did. There wasn't much of a choice. He stepped into the house. He took a few steps into the front room and heard exactly what he thought he would hear. The front door crashed shut. Whispering voices filled his ears, whispers that sounded more like screams. He stood alone in what was once his family's front room. He was alone, but not by himself. It was as if eyes were watching him. He spun around to see if anyone was behind him. Nothing. He turned to face the majority of the house again, and the whispering persisted. He knew eyes were upon him, could feel them. Movement to his left caught his attention. Quick. By the time his head swung that way, whatever he spied was gone. If this was indeed his old home, the room that he was now looking at was the kitchen. He inched along the middle of the front room towards the kitchen. As he approached the opening, he put his back to the wall so he could poke his head into the room. He paused before he glanced in. He took a quick look and saw nothing. The house was still being filled with pulses of light from outside. Thunder was providing the soundtrack. He committed himself to entering the kitchen. He shuffled in. His shoes glided over the linoleum. The ground felt sandy and dirty. The kitchen was a skeleton of what it once was or supposed to be. Cabinet doors were hanging by loose screws. The sole window was gone. Rain snuck in through the frame. He was nearing the end of the long kitchen when its head peered around the corner before disappearing back behind the wall. It seemed like a sick version of peekaboo. This time, instead of pausing, he dashed toward the corner and turned. He was now looking at what was once his room. Lightning was flashing so wildly, seemed like a strobe light. Claps of thunder rolled so deep he could feel it. It was standing in the center of the vacant room. One arm was outstretched. Was it pointing at him? No, it was beckoning him, inviting him to come closer. For a brief second he saw its eyes. He recognized them instantly. Michelle. The room blacked out, then relit, and she was gone. Without hesitation, he knew where he would see her next. Behind the wooden door with an M on the top half, a cold sweat began to take over his body. He finished crossing the room that opened up to the hallway. The marked door down the hall was just as he drew it. There were minor details that existed that weren't in his drawing, but the picture in his head from when they were kids was an exact match. After only taking a few steps, he realized he was seeing firsthand what he had dreamt about 2 nights ago. He soon found himself face to face with what he knew would be his final destination. His heart pounded with such force he thought it might actually jump up his throat and make a miraculous exit. With no effort by him, the M door exploded open, leaving Matthew breathless for a moment. As he caught his breath, 2 words escaped his lips. It's time. Both windows had been blown out in this room. Rain entered at will here. This room appeared to be in the same shape as the others, dank and in disrepair. A waterlogged dresser, a wall mirror, and a bed were the only remnants of what used to be a little girl's dream room. There she was, sitting on the bed, which occupied the center of the room. Her back was to him as she sat on the far side of the bed. He wasn't sure what to do next. She answered that with her own actions. She lifted her right hand and patted an empty area next to her on the bed. He wanted to call out to her, but the deafening thunder assured that his cry would be unheard. Reluctantly, he slowly moved into the room and around the corner of the bed. Never losing a visual of her, he eased down onto the mattress next to her. Time seemed to be inching along. She stared directly in front of her, not acknowledging his presence. Sweat dripped into his eyes. He blinked to clear his vision. A new scene welcomed his opening eyes. Michelle had turned to look at him. She had the most beautiful smile. The room behind her was full of colors. The walls were painted a light purple, Michelle's favorite color. Furniture was strategically placed and well decorated. Bows riddled Michelle's hair, She was 8 years old. After gazing at each other for what was probably only a few seconds that seemed like an eternity, he whispered, "What's happening?" He asked the question without really looking for or wanting an answer. Why was he back in her childhood, their childhood? Sunlight breaking in through the front bay window warmed his face. "Let's play," she responded. Her smile filled his soul that had been so empty. "I've been waiting for you to come back for so long. Let's go. Play what, Michelle?" "I don't know what to do," Matthew burst out. "Please help me understand," he said with tears streaming down his cheeks. He reached out to grab her by the arm. His motivation was to snatch her up and escape with her. Escape to where? Anywhere but here. His hand latched onto her wrist and squeezed it tight. She looked down in disbelief. As her eyes rose up again to meet with his, he saw that her smile was gone. Fear and desperation filled her expression. Lightning bounced off the sky and filled the room. Hell had returned. His grasp on her wrist was still secure. Her warm, soft skin had been replaced by a gray, rubbery substitute. Michelle's hair was once again eclipsing her entire head. She started to scream and thrash around, trying to break free. He was still holding on to the idea of taking her from this place. Her cries were more animal than human. Their eyes met briefly, and he saw nothing but horror in them. They wrestled violently throughout the room. He kept screaming at her, "Come with me." Over and over he could hear himself exclaim, more and more desperate with every effort. He could see that she was trying to respond, but it was inaudible. Rain was pouring into the room at an incredible rate. He was starting to lose his grip on what he thought to be her wrist. They danced around the room with lightning providing a spectacular light show. He kept calling out his plea, "Come with me." He could now hear her voice out an answer, but he couldn't make it out. They slammed into the wall near the empty bay window. She tried backing away. He held tight. She was now screaming at him while pulling away. His grip was fading. She inched closer to escaping, letting go. She screamed her demands again. Her fingers were all he had left. She bellowed out her wish one more time. The moment was instantaneous. Just as what she was roaring out became clear to him, he lost his grip on her. She stumbled backwards towards the window and tumbled out. The powerful storm seemed to swallow her up. Matthew fell down as he lost his grip and landed on the floor next to the bed, hitting the back of his head on the mattress frame. His eyes fogged over with the blast, and he could feel warm blood dripping down his neck. Matthew lay motionless on the wet floor waiting to die. What Michelle had been saying during the struggle replayed in his mind over and over again. As he was repeating it in his head, he started to whisper it aloud, "I want to be alone. I want to be alone." Darkness fell over and into Matthew Scott. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The red light flashed at the nurse's station. On what had been a slow day, Kathleen, head nurse at the Eastbrook Psychiatric Hospital, sat up in her chair to view the video monitors. She could see that there was a disturbance taking place in the cafeteria. Kathleen left her station and headed towards the dining area. Once there, she was greeted by several of the male nurses who already had the situation under control. Two of the nurses had a male patient pinned to the ground. He was trying to wiggle his way free, but to no avail. He quickly gave up trying. Kathleen recognized immediately who it was, Matthew Scott. Poor thing, she thought to herself. She had been employed here for nearly 30 years now, and he had been here for 25 of them. Lynette, a new nurse, approached Kathleen and nodded at Matthew. He was being injected with something obviously designed to subdue him. Lynette asked Kathleen what the patient's status was. "He's a lifer here, poor guy, no friends or family." The nurses were getting Matthew to his feet. He was sent here more than 20 years ago after killing his twin sister. Matthew now stood facing Kathleen with his arms interlocked with the male nurses that were holding him down. Kathleen leaned over to finish talking to Lynette as to keep her voice down. He snapped one day and threw his sister out of her bedroom window. The effects of the injection were starting to take hold of Matthew. His eyes were getting heavy, and he started to slouch a bit. He's generally very quiet, but occasionally he acts up like this. Who knows what's running through his head? The two male nurses approached Kathleen with Matthew nearly completely passed out in their arms. They asked where they should take him, meaning they weren't sure whether to take him to his room or to a holding cell where they could keep a closer eye on. She thought about it for a second and came to the conclusion, after witnessing this several times over the years, that he posed no threat to himself or anyone, and directed them to take him to his room. The nurses carried the dead weight past Kathleen and Lynette towards the main hallway where they would find his room. Matthew was out. His eyes were open, but his eyes were fixated on something other than where he was. The nurses stopped, and one turned back at Kathleen. "Which room is he in?" Kathleen glanced back at the nurses and responded, 339. Story 3. Nightmare night. The night seemed relatively calm, promising rain later on. The clouds were dark and had been carrying their burden the entire day. Rob hoped the storm would pass over, or they would be able to make it through. His stomach rumbled hungrily, and his eyes couldn't stay open any longer. Micah wasn't interested in driving while he slept, so they had to find the nearest motel. One appeared on the side of the road and left them with a couple hours to drive in the morning. It didn't appear the motel cared much for a garden, but then again, it wouldn't improve their business after the building's condition. The bar's parking lot appeared full, so they could expect a crowd of rowdy patrons. Rob found the bathroom and tried the door, frowning when it was locked. This bar didn't even support more than one toilet. Rob waited patiently until a man came out and entered silently, debating on holding his breath. He stared at himself in a cracked mirror, brushing his brown hair around. "You know anything about Joe Arnold's?" Rob looked over his shoulder and spotted an open vent near the ceiling, telling himself to hurry up before he contracted a disease. The water surprisingly ran out of the faucet, even though the metal was slightly rusted. "Excuse me, do you expect me to know each and every one of my patrons by name?" "I can't help you." Rob's gaze narrowed, and he tilted his head to stare at the vent. Was that the policeman in a different room? "Well, you better figure something out, Mr. Loper. We have a killer on the loose, or have you not been paying attention to the news?" A gruff voice informed. "What do you want me to do about it?" "It's your job to protect the public," Mr. Loper accused. The autopsy report came back and revealed high levels of alcohol in his blood, which leads us to believe he was drinking before he was killed. Are we wrong in thinking that? You have already spoken to Mr. Riley, the other bar owner, in a 5-mile radius. Don't think we are singling you out. He could see her red eyes and tear streaks, realizing death was all over the place. Where would it strike next? They should have left earlier this morning. A 1 hour difference would have gotten them away from this dangerous place. Would you relax? I want some more to drink. You can go back to the motel. It's just across the street. No, I'm not going to leave you here by yourself. You'll probably stumble out into the road by the time you're done, Rob said bluntly, sighing. Just get a beer or two, and let's go back, he suggested. Rob watched as Micah called the bartender over and started to fish through his wallet for some money. He put a 20 down and waited for his cousin to hurry up. Shaking his head at the entrance to the bar, he held the door open and made sure to stay beside Micah. He had been drinking some really strong stuff after all, but at least he would have some peace and quiet in the morning. Micah is going to be out like a light as they approach room 14. He asked Micah for the keys and unlocked the door for his cousin. Go sit your ass down and finish up, he ordered, holding the heavy door open for him. His nose wrinkled at the lingering stench of smoke that refused to go away. A banging noise made Rob poke his head and stare to his right, noticing two figures up ahead. One of them was obviously drunk, and the other was a small woman whom seemed to be struggling. I'll be right back, Micah. He walked over to the two slowly because he didn't want to startle them. Need a little help? Rob asked the woman, smiling faintly as she turned around. She seemed really young and quite smaller than the man. The man seemed to be putting most of his weight on her, too. Her startled eyes looked over him before she visibly relaxed. No, thank you, sir. We are almost to our room. I really appreciate the offer, though, she replied, smiling. Rob shook his head and crossed his arms, thinking this woman was something else. Are you sure? It's really no trouble, I'm sure. This isn't the first time. Trust me, I know how to take care of him, she insisted, laughing lightly. Well, good night to the both of you, Rob muttered, stepping back a few feet. Good night. Rob watched the both of them hobble down to a room and stop in front of it. He could tell the woman was very determined, so he left her to taking care of her companion. Walking back into his room, Micah was sprawled at the desk chair, working on his beer and wings. Should I even bother asking you to go to bed? Rob asked, locking the door behind him. Nope, but don't worry about me. You get to drive in the morning, though. I'm just glad. Turning his head, Rob noticed the time and went to the bathroom and changed into some comfortable clothes. He brushed his teeth even though he didn't trust the water coming out of the faucet, and returned to find Micah passing out while eating a wing. Seriously, cousin, Rob muttered, walking over to him. He wiped his hands and mouth off, forcing Micah to get into bed. I'm not doing this again, he warned, moving over to his bed. Don't let the bedbugs bite, Micah answered, rolling over into his covers. I hope not, Rob said to himself, pressing his head into his misshapen pillow. He would be surprised if both of their beds weren't completely infested with the little critters. Sleeping quickly became difficult for him. Micah seemed to be sleeping well, considering the loud snores coming from his direction. The pillows had lumps in them, and to say nothing of the mattress, and of course the AC didn't work. Also, the room smelled even worse than before, which is probably because he was laying in the foul and smoky sheets now. He was going to get up early and take a long shower before they went anywhere. Rob finally fell asleep around 1 in the morning when a sharp noise woke him up. He couldn't tell what it was exactly, yet it would not go away. Rolling over, Rob buried himself under his covers and heard it once more. Micah, Go to sleep, he demanded, and propped himself up. His cousin was sleeping soundly, which made him frown. They did have a window open, and he just hoped somebody wasn't being loud. He didn't feel like walking to the front desk to complain. Rob doubted they would do anything about it anyway. He tried ignoring it until it happened again, but louder this time. "You have got to be kidding me," he grumbled, sliding out of bed. Rob unlocked their door and poked his head outside without seeing anything. "Hey, keep it down," Rob called, hoping they would hear him. Another bang made him groan and turn on his heel. He hated rude people and planned to give them a piece of his mind. Slipping on his shoes, he grabbed his phone off the nightstand along with the room key. He shot a quick look to Micah before walking quietly outside, closing the door softly. Rob crossed his arms and tried to ignore the chilly weather, hearing the window whistle through the dead trees. He listened for the noise again and stopped in front of the room it seemed to be coming from. "Be quiet in there," Rob demanded, frowning when he heard another bang. His eyes narrowed because it came from further down. Trudging to the end of the rooms, Rob flinched when the noise originated around the corner. "What are you making all this noise for?" he asked, turning the corner. A dumpster sat in the corner and was surrounded by old cardboard boxes. Just to the left of the dumpster lay two figures with one on top of the other. "What the hell are you doing?" Rob shouted, wondering if this person was being attacked. He looked down at his phone and had 911 at the ready, jogging closer to see if he was mistaken. It never occurred to him to be afraid or think logically. In this situation, this person needed help. Rob skidded to a stop and stared at the scene before him. It was the man and woman from before, and he almost assumed the drunken man was doing something sick to the small woman. It was the other way around. "What are you?" Rob began to ask. She turned and stared at him with emotionless eyes, resembling a doll's blank stare. Her face was pale and dark lines crisscrossed one of her cheeks. All at once, her neck stretched before his eyes with more lines going back and forth across it. Were those stitches? Rob stumbled backward, running into a tin trash can and knocking the lid off. "Shit!" he shouted, seeing as she stood and turned her attention to him. She moved stiffly like something is wrong with her limbs, and Rob couldn't tear his gaze away from her distorted form. All he had to do was press a button on his phone to call for help, but he couldn't even think straight. His brown eyes shifted to her bloody dress and spotted the bloody knife clenched in her hand. "Help me." He noticed the man on the ground, moving slowly. The man was still alive. Rob stepped backward quickly, knowing he had to do something. A wooden board next to the dumpster caught his attention, and he sprinted like never before to reach it. He grabbed it and swung it behind him immediately, catching the creature in the torso. The woman fell to the ground, and if he didn't know any better, he would have said that he broke her. Not even a second later, she would have plunged that knife into his back. If he hadn't reacted as quickly, she would have killed him. Rob quickly moved over to the man and saw how several patches of skin were missing on his right arm. "Holy shit," he said under his breath, realizing what the woman would have done. He pulled his shirt off instantly and started to wrap it around the man's arm to stop the blood from coming. "I tried to run away. I tried to run." She, the man mumbled frantically. "It's okay," Rob reassured, glancing anxiously over his shoulder for the woman. "Tomino is a sweet girl. She's my friend." "What the hell are you talking about?" Rob asked, wondering if that was the woman's name. What was she? I'm going to get help. Don't worry, he assured. Rob stood and grabbed the wooden board, retreating to the spot where he left Tomino. She no longer lay there, sending waves of panic through him. Where did she go? Did she run away? Would she be back? Rob went back to the man and kept his hand pressed on the wound to apply pressure. More blood leaked from the man's head, making him think she bludgeoned him with the knife. How was this man supposed to fight something so awful? He would have never been able to react in time while he was drunk. I'm calling help. It's going to be okay, Rob repeated, calling 911 on his phone. Those moments alone with the man were the worst of his entire life. He was sure Tomino would be back to murder the both of them, but he was only comforted by the 911 operative whom he forced to stay on the line with him. The sirens in the distance appeared shortly, and Rob had to shout a few times to get someone's attention. He was not leaving this man alone even for a few seconds. The police and emergency crew took over for him. The man was placed on a stretcher and loaded up into the ambulance, disappearing within a few minutes while the policeman remained behind to receive a statement. Rob explained everything to the police, adding they should ask the victim for his statement as well. He also mentioned what the man called her, Tomino, and wondered if it would help the investigation at all. It might be the woman's actual name, but Rob couldn't be so sure the monster even had a name. How could such a thing exist? He didn't sleep well that night and shut the window, preferring the smoke over something slipping inside. Rob woke very early and showered for nearly an hour, standing in the cold water and trying to erase the memories from the previous night. He kept trying to tell himself that he saved a man's life, yet he still wished he never left his room. The police would be able to catch Tomino now, and he hoped the crimes would stop in the future. This might be the chance the police have been waiting for. Rob packed everything into the car and woke Mike up early without breathing a word to him about last night. If he found out on his own, he found out, but Micah quickly placed his head on a pillow and was out. Rob left the motel quickly, speeding down the deserted highway for several miles before slowing down. He just had to get through Aunt Tess's funeral and return home, yet something told him that he wouldn't be at peace until Tomino was caught.